All right, Daniel Andrews, thank you for being on the show with us.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure meeting you the other day, and I'm honored to be able to have some contribution for your audience because I think you bring a lot to the world as well. So,
Absolutely. Now, Daniel, one thing I know about you is that you refuse to use the term networking. And being someone who speaks so much about that, why don't you tell us why?
number one, I believe language is important. Number two, there are two really solid books that I have a lot of faith in. One, the title is Networking Isn't Working. And they don't mean networking doesn't constitute work. What they mean is networking is broken, right?
Mm,
And the other is called Superconnector. And the subtitle is Stop Networking and Start Building Relationships That Matter.
mm,
And what I find is that when I ask people, from the beginning to describe what networking means to you, I hear it's peer group, right? That's interesting, but that's a peer group. That's not networking, right? I hear it's social prospecting. Oh, networking is where I go to the happy hour that's sponsored by the chamber and I try to get customers. I'm like, nope, not networking either. Networking is a leads group, right? Where we meet once a week and we give each other names of people that we think might be prospects. I'm like, mm. So whatever people think of networking, it's not what I think networking really should be. But rather than
mm.
try to get them to redefine a phrase they already know, I just choose to use different phrases. I'm going with Scott Grove's thought. Scott Gerber, excuse me. Scott Gerber, the author of the book. Second subtitle: Stop networking and start building relationships that matter. And my
Mm.
analogy there is, if I say the word mother, Sam, whose do you think of? Yours or mine?
Mine.
Yeah, you've never met mine, right? So if I say networking, but not like you think, you're stuck with what you think. I can't
Mm.
get you away from it. So let's not talk about networking. You can have that definition. You can keep it for yourself. I refer to network building. Network is a noun, never is a verb, as far as the work I do.
Yeah. So then, what is network building?
It's learning to build and leverage deep business relationships.
Hmm.
And when I say deep, I don't mean deep like marriage deep, like even best friend deep,
Right.
but deep, deeper than awareness, right? What people do when they say they're doing out networking, I call it marketing by hand. They've handed
Okay.
out business cards, they've introduced themselves, they've got a warm, firm handshake, right, and a bright smile. They've talked about the weather and the school and the pets and the sports scores, but all they've done is give people an awareness that they exist. They haven't pursued anything that's going to give someone else the confidence that to refer them to their network will bring value, to both sides of the equation. So for all they've accomplished, they might as well have gone to the parking lot and slid a business card under every windshield wiper as far as what they've achieved, right?
Sure.
Their awareness is where it starts, but you've got to start from quantity and sift for quality. And then you got to build with the quality.
Hmm. Okay. Well, then, what do you suggest? What do we do to build quantity first?
LinkedIn can work, right? Alignable can work depending on the reach that you're looking for. In-person events, if those exist. It can simply be leveraging your current network, and I'll come back to what I mean,
Mm.
by not just the generic use of it as a noun, but specifically, what I mean, to broaden it, right? But never with the idea that everybody's going to have the same value business-wise. We're all God's children. We all have value on this planet, right? I would always treat
Sure.
another human
Yes.
being with the utmost courtesy and respect. But given a finite amount of time to focus on business, I'm going to choose the people that I can serve and be served by primarily. I'm looking for people that I can bring value to and they can bring value to me in the same time.
You had previously used that phrase, given the finite amount of time we have on this earth,
Mm-hmm.
I'm choosing to grow this relationship, to have this conversation. And I think for many people, perhaps with inexperience, social anxiety, maybe they label themselves as introverts, and there are all sorts of different angles to this. But let's just say the inexperienced, intentional relationship builder may feel like if I approach this conversation with something in mind, then I'm automatically doing it out of integrity, outside of it, and inauthentically. So, what can we do to help reframe ourselves when we're being more intentional about how we build our networks?
That is a beautiful balance beam to walk. You're very wise to have seen that because it is important. It's like that really old bad joke. Sincerity is the key. Once you can fake that, you've got it made, right? So, right, if I'm networking intentionally, does that somehow rob it of its integrity, right? If I'm networking with the Sam Heningers of the world because I think that you can bring me something back, does that mean I'm doing it out of integrity? Outside the scope of integrity, right? From a non-integral position. I don't think that's true. I don't think that's true for a couple of reasons. Number one is I believe in what I have to offer. And why would I use an approach that I know is not going to work, right? I wouldn't publish flyers in Greek and go down my neighborhood, right? There might be a couple people that can read Greek in my neighborhood, right? I wouldn't, right? I wouldn't go to the places where I cannot serve and shout out my brand and my name, right? In conjunction with that, I believe that I can meet people that I believe have value to the business world, that have a valuable business offering that I can amplify with integrity. So the key isn't, am I looking at the people around me, can they serve me? The question is, meaning that's a legitimate part of the equation, but only it becomes illegitimate if you're only doing it from the context of, I want them to serve me and I'm not willing to serve,
Hmm.
right? And so I use the word mutuality. Some people use the word reciprocity, but reciprocity to me might fall on the edge of, oh, I have a lead for you, Sam. Do you have one for me? Well, as soon as you got one for me, you can have it. Oh, I got
Hmm.
$1 for you, Sam. You got $1 for me? All right. That feels a little more immediate. But mutuality to me implies relationships where we can both thrive, but at any given moment, one of us can be down, right? Let's think
Hmm.
about a best friend relationship, right? If your best friend called you up and said, and I'm thinking of my best friend, hey, had to take my wife to the hospital, right? I have to leave here, right? Or she's at the hospital. I need to go meet her. You need to come right now and watch the twins so I can go to the hospital and be by her side. I wouldn't be like, yeah, but are you going to come fix that back fence for me the way you promised you would? Can you do that tomorrow even? Why don't you
Yeah.
do that first and then go to the hospital while I'm babysitting the kid? Right? In the moment, he needs me more than I need him, and I'm willing to show up for that. But I know that when I say to Scott, Scott, he's a GC and he likes to work to get paid, right? Which is fine.
Hmm.
Scott, you've been promising me you're going to fix the fence on the back gate, the gate on the back fence for a couple of months now. Can you prioritize that? He'll be like, yeah, yeah, I'll get to it. Right. So in a spirit of mutuality, business wise, right? At any moment, we're not trying to stay even, but we show up with a sense of evenness, a sense of I'm willing to contribute, right? When I block time with somebody in person, digitally, one way, meaning I make commitments to people and then I sit at my desk and keep those commitments. I'm prepared to serve more than I am served in that moment.
Hmm.
I'm prepared to. I don't seek to. It's not my quest, but I'm prepared to. Sometimes I will find in that moment that I do serve them more than I am served. Sometimes in that moment, I find that they serve me more than I serve them. Sometimes in that moment, we find that there might be, even in that moment, some reciprocity or mutuality, or we can pursue it further down the road. But I got a phone call with a guy today. He's like, tell me about what you do. Maybe I need to hire you. Maybe I need what you're offering. And I said, well, give me a little bit of information about where you're at momentarily. And he started talking. I said, oh, wait, forget about what I do. I got a job lead for you. So I showed him the description that came from a friend of mine, and he's like, ooh, I want it. I'm like, right. So what I do is irrelevant in the moment,
That's
right?
so
In
interesting.
that moment, it was 100% a one-way street.
Hmm.
But he showed up and asked me, what do you do? How can I bring value to your world, right? And I was willing to put that on hold and bring more value to him. Because if he gets this job, he doesn't need me, probably. He might.
Hmm. Interesting. You know, the book Influence by Robert Cialdini has really
Mm,
popularized that law of reciprocity. Is one of the foundational books of any business school, and it rubbed me the wrong way in a lot
good,
of
because it rubs me
instances.
the wrong way.
Because and I'm sure there are some apologists and instances where I may have misinterpreted things, but it struck me as very mechanistic. He talks about the click whir phenomenon, where if you behave this certain way, people will automatically respond this certain way. And so it's like a camera, like an old school camera. It's click and then it produces
Hmm.
the image. That, along with just the idea that we can be perhaps unintentionally manipulative in the way we go about building relationships, I think it puts as a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths who want to be authentic but keep getting fed bad advice.
Yeah, and I object to that phrase, for two reasons: the word law and the word reciprocity. Right? We already kind
Mm,
of picked apart the word reciprocity, right? But the law of reciprocity doesn't exist. We have 6,000 years of recorded history that says that good things don't happen to good people, bad things happen to good people.
mm,
Right, right, right. We have this enduring. Now, I'm no sociologist or anthropologist, right? But it seems to me a fairly universal cultural notion that if I'm a good person, good things will come back to me, right?
right.
Clearly, written history says that's not true. Our personal experience says it's not true, right? But I do believe that you can put yourself into places, people, resources, organizations, contexts where the good that you can do will be valued enough that people will seek to give back,
Mm, mm,
right? When it's all said and done, what's that old the Beatles song, right? And in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make, right? No, there are people in the world that throw off more because there are people in the world that take a lot. Now, unfortunately, they're few and far between, tend to be criminal, certainly evil,
sure.
right? But there's a black hole somewhere that's soaking that up. So some of us are giving off more in the grand context than we're getting back. But I think we can choose to put ourselves in a context where we can be of service to people that can be of service to us. And if we do it with the notion that in this moment I'm willing to serve more, we will over time, I don't want to, not necessarily a long time, but the right people will be attracted to that because people like to serve. People like to serve. And so talked to a guy one time and he's like, yeah, yeah. And this is kind of the second half of a longer story, but I'll tell the second half first. He goes, yeah, I understand what you're saying, Dan. I always try to give twice as much as I get. I'm like, that is an absolutely terrible idea.
Huh.
And he
Interesting.
goes, why? I said, people will pull away from you if it feels lopsided. Even if
Mm,
the lopsidedness is coming to them, they're receiving more than they're giving. They will pull away because it feels weird. The right people will, the people you want in your world, right? You have to create space for mutuality, right?
I agree. I think I've experienced being on the receiving end of overly generous people, and it puts me off because I feel too indebted to them.
It's a weird feature, right? I mean, our experience, at the playground, right? Give me your candy bar from your lunchbox and I'll be your best friend, right?
Mm,
That if you do something for me, right, I owe you something back, right? So we think if we want something from somebody, we got to do something for them. No, no. If I want you to like me, Sam, I would ask you to do me probably a favor for two
mm.
reasons. Who do you do favors for?
Friends,
And so if you've done a favor for me, I fall into the category of people you like.
right?
Secondarily, if you've done me a favor, who owes who? I owe you. What's
Mm.
your perspective on a guy that owes you a favor? I'll keep this guy around, right? Sooner or later,
Right.
we're going to be caught at the restaurant. I'll be without my wallet, and Daniel owes me.
Mm.
He'll come through. Even if he won't buy me dinner, he'll spot me, right, until I can Venmo him when I get back to my cell phone, right?
Sure.
But if I've done you a favor, you owe me. And subconsciously, what's your notion? I don't like hanging out with Dan. I don't know why. At any moment, I'm afraid he's going to ask me to buy him dinner, right? Or spot him 20, right? Till payday,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
It's a
Yeah.
subtlety.
What else do people misunderstand or get wrong about building these relationships?
I think the first is that they have to build a deep relationship with each person that they meet in the chain. And let's fix some terms pretty clearly. Deep relationship meaning you've got a threshold. I don't want to say a barrier, but a threshold, a bar to cross in terms of trust and credibility, right? You only really have to cross that bridge with clients, potential clients, right? At some point, they have to trust you enough to give you their money, and with your first degree network, right?
Mm.
In LinkedIn, they use the terminology, right? Degrees of separation, right? So first degrees are right now. You're never going to get to this level with everybody that constitutes. I've got like 9,000, right? It's just insane. Okay. But I have probably 900 that constitute my capital N network. These are people that if I sent up the bat signal, they would reply. If I said, "Do you have a minute? Will you call me back?" They would. If I called them on the phone and they could answer, they would answer. That if I said, "I don't have time to explain it, but I need $10 till payday. Here's my GoFundMe, right? Would you send the bucks?" They would be like, "Yeah, tell me the story later. It's got to be crazy because I know you," right? Or whatever the case may be. When you've built with those people, you now have access to the people that they have built with. And if
Right.
and now if you want to make that person a customer or client, that's second degree. And I'll use some specific names. I spoke into a room of about 8 people one day. Uh, I'm looking for a recruiter. I need to locate a recruiter. I have services to offer them. I need one in my network. And Ariel was in the room, and within an hour, right, that was about 10 a.m. And by 11 a.m., because I have the timestamps on this, I can show you the text thread. It's very fascinating. By 11 a.m., she said, "Dan Andrews, meet Dan," someone else. Guy's first name happens to be Dan, right? Daniel Andrews, and Dan, fill in the blank. She said, Dan Andrews said the word recruiter. I naturally thought of you, Dan. Um, Try and help him out if you can. If not, maybe point him in the right direction. And she said, "Daniel, this guy Dan, he's big in the space. He does big things, basically." It's very short. I could pull out the text thread and show you. And cool, right? So he messages me, "What do you want? How can I help? How can I help you? How can I help? How can I help?" 4 words. Text, so I don't have the tone. So I crafted 5 tight sentences, what I needed, and sent it back. Took me a few minutes. If you look at the timestamps, a few minutes went by. Don't know if I was
Mm.
interrupted or if I actually spent 21 minutes crafting 5 sentences, but I don't doubt that I spent 21 minutes crafting 5 sentences. I don't doubt that. The right 5, right? I sent it to him. He said, "Give me a second." And by that was 11:27. At 11:28, he says, "Give me a second." At 11:29, he's got me in a thread with a woman named Anna. Then he comes back to me and says directly, "If Anna's not the right person, let me know and I'll help you find the right one." Anna and I go back and forth. She said, "How did you get here?" I said, "Dan, fill in the blank, introduced me because Ariel asked him to." And Ariel and I go way back. 10 p.m. at night when she and I both got distracted from our inboxes. Clear, you can't sit in front of LinkedIn all day. I said, "Can I have 15 minutes on your calendar?" She sent me a link for 30. I built zero relationship with Dan and with Anna. My relationship with Ariel's relationship with Dan, Dan's relationship with Anna.
Mm.
Now, if I'm going to make her my client, I've got to build some rapport and trust and confidence.
Sure.
But in terms of asking for the introduction to the person I'm seeking, I can leverage my first degree and their first degree and their first degree until I find what I need. People they miss how simple that is.
I really appreciate that. And I wonder what you would say about how do you perhaps coach or lead people towards making better introductions, because introductions aren't all one size fits all. The quality can be not as great depending on how you get teed up. And so, what do you do to help ensure that the transition takes off?
Number one, I'm prepared to coach people that need help in how to introduce me.
Mm.
Okay. And I'd like to make a distinction here that I think is fairly important. I don't like to teach vocabulary if I don't have to, right? Because I think the less we ask people to learn and the more we ask them to practice what they already know, the better off we are.
Mm.
But I will use some words. I'll make sure that you guys are clear on some words that I use. Connection or contacts to me is everybody in your phone, on your LinkedIn, business cards and shoeboxes, old people like me, Rolodexes. Okay. Network, and I always spell it with a capital N, which my English teacher cringe from high school, is the people that will return your call, right? That reply to your bad signal, right? And as my friend Suzanne Taylor King puts it, just because you're in their phone doesn't mean they will answer their phone, right?
Mm.
Okay. So once we have a distinction, connections, and there's nothing wrong with connections. Number one, people have to start as connections before they come from network. Some people may go straight from network to customer. I mean, excuse me, connection to customers. Some people may become connection and create an introduction, right? They don't have to be at network to create an introduction or to receive one. But anyway, connection is your broad scope of the people you've met. Network is a smaller subset. So the first is some awareness. The way I introduce connection to connection is different than the way I introduce network to network.
Hmm.
And it's different than the way I introduce connection to network, which is different than the way I introduce network to
I see.
connection, right? I mean, I could, I mean, I don't suppose we're doing screen shares, but I could pull up some on my other screen right here and read you some that I created in the last couple of days to give you a sense of what the differences are. But the first thing is to, number one, awareness, the fact that there are several types of introductions,
Hmm.
right? And then the second would be to be prepared to coach. At the network level, I don't coach people on how to introduce me because their raw, authentic words will mean more than anything I could spoon feed them,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
Okay. I mean, I've been in rooms, networking events online, and all these people are throwing these huge blocks of text, right? Their name
Hmm.
and their, all their social media handles and their value proposition and how to reach them. And I put my LinkedIn profile, that's all I ever put in there. I put my LinkedIn profile and I said, I won't say anything about what I do. Anybody in the room that knows me is welcome to say good or bad, anything they want. And by the end of the meeting, 2/3 of the room had said, apparently Daniel Andrews is the guy to meet. But the people in the room that knew me were network, and I knew they would influence. I didn't coach them on what to say. I said, say what you want to about me.
That makes a lot of sense. And I've found that to be true, that having others use their own words is a lot more powerful than you giving them something to say. But like you were saying there, with connections, people who aren't necessarily in your network, aren't closer to you in that way, it can help to have those, perhaps those five little sentences that you
Sure.
crafted to
Well,
help
and,
them
and
orient.
I will give your audience something actionable because if they're listening, right, with their pens at the ready, as
Right.
if, but if they are, they're like, okay, this the philosophy sounds great, but what's actionable? I will give you something very actionable. If you're in a setting, it can be in person or particularly digital networking events. I always put air quotes around networking. I can't stop myself. A digital networking event, you'll sometimes find yourself in the same breakout with somebody that you've already been with, either that moment or if it's a recurring event, right? Stuff like that. In those moments, when you find yourself in a circle, a breakout, be it an in-person experience or, you know, digitally, with somebody that you've already met, don't reintroduce yourself. Have them introduce you and you introduce them.
Hmm.
Even if you just met them in the last breakout cycle, because here's why that's actionable. Your messaging is not what you say about yourself. Your messaging is what other people say about you.
Hmm.
So in real time, you're going to find out real quick how clear your messaging is landing. Because if they don't
Absolutely.
understand what you do or explain it poorly, that, by the way, falls on you.
Right.
If they do it well, you'll surprise yourself that they make you sound better than you probably would have made yourself sound.
Hmm.
Right? I was in an event today, which is a pre-sales event for me. It's an exposure where people will then at the end sometimes say, I want a longer conversation with you. And Brenda, who knows me and who's bought my services before, was in the room. And she's like, can I say something? I'm like, only if you swear to God, don't make it sound like a sales pitch. And she's like, this is not a sales pitch. But, and then she goes on. And it turns out we got zero responses, where we wanted from that because she oversold it, I think, right? And I wasn't even didn't even want her to, right? I mean, I think it came on too much like, she was a plant, and she wasn't. She just happened to show up, at the thing I was doing.
Well,
But
and that's
anyway,
so interesting because we have a sense for that, don't we?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Hmm.
Now, whether any of those people loop back around to me, I don't know. But I'm just saying, an actionable thing is if you find yourself next, like, and I kind of point out the door when I say the word Greg because Greg owns the building I'm in. This is a co-working space, and he's usually seated over there. So people go, why do you always say Greg and point? I'm like, because he's over there. Anyway, Greg will occasionally be at a live event with me here in this town and be like, hey, da, 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 you got to meet Daniel Andrews, right? And he'll bring him over to me, like, hey, you got to meet Daniel Andrews, and they're like, what do you do? Looking at me, which is legitimate, and I'll go, Greg, you tell him.
Hmm.
Which is number one, my test to make sure Greg's clear, right? But number two, doesn't it sound better coming out of Greg's mouth than my mouth?
And that, I think, for so many people would be a dream come true, to not have to feel like they're pitching themselves constantly. or to try to avoid it sounding too pitchy.
Sure, sure. Right. I mean, I threw out somebody's name in this conversation already. She and I brought lots of value to each other, right? I didn't give her any particular kudos. I didn't say she's genius, but I did say, that, as my friend Suzanne Taylor King says, and I said, just because you're in their phone doesn't mean they'll answer their phone. When people encounter Suzanne Taylor King at this point, they're going to go, oh, yeah, she's pretty deep, right? If they stumble across her in the wild, they're still going to be like, that's pretty profound.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. One thing we discussed earlier was, for me, a target audience of mine is working with executives. And one thing that a veteran private equity manager found and discussed in a Harvard Business Review article about what they look for in executives is not so much when they're trying to place a CEO in a new portfolio company, they're not so much looking for past performance, although that's obviously part of the equation. What they're really looking for is, can they bring a team with them? Can they draw upon their network to bring talented people along with them into the new company? And that to me stood out as just a totally different way of looking about growing a network, because leadership is so much about, we talk about it in every which way, but in order to inspire people enough to come follow you into something new, that's a totally different level of relationship.
Sure,
So
it really is, right? And you've probably heard the saying, people don't quit jobs, they quit managers,
mm,
right? And HBR knows this, right? Harvard Business Review, the people that write it, the people that produce for it, right? They know that's a fact. And so if I'm hiring a new C-level or exec, and he or she can bring people that already trust them with them, right? Then I'm looking at reduced turnover, right? I'm looking at some awareness and some passion. I'm looking at, we're not having to work out the kinks about the way these two people jihad together, right? And the way they're going to make it all work, right? I know that going in, right? HR screening, recruiting is an expensive process, right? And certainly I'm willing to throw out an open position and see who applies. But if Bob or Sue knows who they want to bring with them, right, and they meet the criteria, the fact that they've already been vetted, right, is a huge part of that. I mean, you get this, and the word is misused, right? But they keep the current culture, the youth, the kids today, like you look pretty young to me, Sam. Nepo baby, right? They're saying nepotism, which is actually a very narrow definition, right? But you know, and the privilege, because the people only hire people who look like them. No, they hire people that they know.
mm,
They hire people that they know, right?
right.
If Fred's already proven his worth to me as a fraternity brother at college or as a joint partner, in a joint, in a group project at school, sure, the demographically Fred's likely to look a lot like me, right? But I didn't hire him because he looks like me. I brought him with me to my team because I already know I can trust him,
Mm. I
right?
think so often it can feel like, well, I'll just speak for myself. I've harbored this backwards idea that in order for, again, it to be authentic, for the relationship to be one with integrity, be it a client or some other opportunity, for some reason it has to be with someone that I don't have a relationship with yet. Because if I have that relationship with them, then it means there's some sort of favoritism or unfairness that comes up with that. You mentioned nepotism, which has a specific use there, but I wonder, yeah, how do you draw that distinction and get rid of that perhaps roadblock and take full advantage of the people who are already around you in those relationships?
Sure. Well, yeah, exactly. It involves a shift, and the first shift is the way you think about shifts, right?
Mm,
Before I offer coaching to anybody, right, my coaches taught me to ask, how do you feel about change? Right? Because if you're not willing to make changes, then all the money and time in the world ain't going to fix anything, right? So, so the first is an awareness around the shift. There are many, many, many things that we think will work in the world of human endeavor and human relationships that actively don't, that work against us. But we think they should work, and we don't pay attention to the statistics, the
mm,
outcomes that prove that they won't. Right? and this is Dan Ariely, I think. They gave a Nobel Peace Prize about 30 years ago in economics, a Nobel Economics Prize, to the guy that founded the field, and I'll put quotes around that for you'll see why in a second, of behavioral economics,
Okay.
which is a fancy way of saying people don't do what you think they would do.
Sure.
And we have 6,000 years of recorded history that says people don't do what you think they would do. Oh, here's a really good one. Just caught this the other day. You want somebody to perform well at a simple task, throwing darts at a dartboard, threading nuts on a bolt, something like that, and you give them an incentive to do it, right? If you get 100%, then 80% you get this reward, 100% you get this big reward. If you make the reward bigger, they're going to try harder, right?
You'd think so,
There's
yeah.
a moment where you make the award so big that the additional effort decreases the accuracy because now
Mm,
it's messed up. There's too much weight on the project, too much weight on the task. Here we
interesting.
go. Here's a good one. Here's a good place we can make a shift, and it relates to networking. How many people or businesses do you know that offer some sort of finder's fee? If you bring me
Oh,
business, I'll give you a percentage of the deal.
yeah, so many.
Clearly, it doesn't work. Because if it worked, we would all be rich from all the business that came our way and all the finder's fees we've collected for the business we sent out. Finder's fees are detrimental to your business relationships. That's a whole nother topic for a whole nother day. I ain't got time for that soapbox. But there's my proof that it doesn't work. So you absolutely need to be aware that what you think will work lots of times won't. And to tell the first half of the two-part story, I said we'll start with the second half,
Mm,
relates to this, I think, unless I misunderstood your question. Friend of named Rob, he's out on the West Coast. We're both part of a learning community where we don't really talk about what we do for a living, but we're in a learning community together. So he puts on Facebook, he happens to be in Asheville, North Carolina. I'm like, I'll come meet you for dinner. He goes, that's a couple hours away. I'm like, it ain't California. I'm coming. Right. So I tell my wife I'm coming in late. I jump in the car, I go up to Asheville, sit down dinner with Rob. And he says, what are you doing these days? Right. What are you doing for work? So I explain a little bit very briefly. And he says, oh, I totally understand. Right. When I sit down with people, I try to do that with no agenda. I just show up with no agenda. I think that's the purest way to do that. I said, Rob, that sounds lovely. It's a terrible idea. And he goes, what? I said, who wants to meet with somebody with no agenda?
mm,
Right. I said, now, I don't really think you had no agenda. I said, Robert, I'm going to give you some different words. I'd like to think I'm hitting the nail on the head here, and you just need a better verbiage, but maybe not. And if not, we're going to make a shift. You need to show up with a willingness to serve in that moment more than you are served.
mm.
You don't need no agenda. You need a positive agenda. That in that moment, if I can be of service to that person more than they are to me, I'm willing to be. Not trying to be, not going to put a round peg in a square hole, but if I can be, I will be. Right?
Hmm.
I mean, think about it. If my wife looked over my shoulder at my phone and she said, oh, I see Susie Q has invited you, for lunch next week. Yeah. What does she want? I don't know.
Sure.
How do all of us in that household feel all of a sudden, right? That's
Yeah.
not cool, right? Right.
Right.
If I propose lunch with Susie Q, her husband's asking the same questions. Probably Susie's asking the same questions,
Right.
right? Why? Why are we doing this? Is the third time he's invited me to lunch, once a month for 3 months. Where's this headed? Right.
Mm,
So the notion that we show up with a pure heart with no agenda works against you. Right.
right.
And the reason it was two halves of the story is I told the Robert story and somebody said, oh, I totally get it. That's why I always try to give twice as much as I get. I'm like, that's a terrible idea. Right. The same guy, I had told that story to the other guy and he's like, what? I said, no, no, no. You're striving for balance. Now, sometimes you have to force the balance. Give you the shortest version. A guy cost me several hours of my life. He happened to own a car dealership. It was B2B sale. I was doing business with him. Cost me multiple hours of my life. I drove 3 hours for an appointment and he wasn't there. Called on him later that day. He was there. He apologized profusely. Couldn't do what I needed to do at that point in the day. So he's cost me a drive from St. Louis to Kansas City and back. And he knows it. And he's very apologetic. And I said, Carter, I'll accept your apology on two conditions. And he said, what are they? I usually say one. I said two in this case. It gets people's attention, let me tell you. And he said, okay, what are the two conditions? I said, number one, that you stop apologizing. You have apologized. I've told you that I've accepted your apology. Unless you have a time machine, why are we talking about 10 a.m.? He goes, well, that makes sense. He said, all right, what's your second condition? I said, I'm sure by the time I come back, I'm going to need an oil change. I can make that happen. I said, I knew you could, Carter. And I left. And my coworker was like, well, that was smart. I'm like, what do you mean? She goes, you got an oil change out of that. I said, you think that's what my time is worth? I said, 200, literally 200 miles in each direction, right? Hours
Mm.
wasted. That's what I said. I let him think we're even, because if he thinks we're not even, he will start to avoid me. So sometimes you have to fabricate space for them to fill the gap,
That's
right?
that's so interesting. Yeah, giving people an opportunity to make it up to you when when I don't know if you want to say trust was breached, but yeah, giving them a chance to save face is a great way to keep them from avoiding you.
Or my daughter comes to dinner at our house and she's like, let me help clean up. Well, my wife's got a particular way of doing it, and she's like, no, no, your guests just stay, right? Well, my daughter, of course, is thinking, you help clean up after dinner, right? That's been her mode for the first 2 decades of her life, right? So she's deep in her 30s now. She's like, I need help. And I'm like, hey, you know what? I don't feel like putting on my shoes again and checking the mail, and I'm not sure the mail had gotten here when I pulled in the driveway. Can you walk out of the mailbox and check the mail? That takes her 45 seconds, right? But I leave her with the impression that's what I need the most right now, so that she's not hanging, dogging around the kitchen trying to, help clean up when we really want her to relax and be a guest in our home.
I love this because it's such a shift from where some people can feel like they are, in the sense that they feel like I have needs. I want to be intentional with these relationships. All I can think about is the thing that I need. But instead, leading with this mutuality, this willingness to give opportunities to either serve or be served, like this openness allows for much more, well, authentic relationships to build.
Think about how much joy you have in giving service to other people.
Mm.
So you're going to rob the other person on the other side of the table from that joy?
Mm.
What? Why would you do that? Why
Right.
would you rob that person of that joy? People love to give. You love to give. The right people love to give.
Mm.
And so you're being selfish if you insist on doing all the giving. What? It's true.
Wow. What else do people get wrong?
They don't ask good questions. They've got this little mantra in their head. This acronym FORD. Don't forget to ask about their friend, their family and their occupation and their recreation and their dreams. And I'm like, isn't that the core of the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, right? That's how you make friends, right? Okay, here we go. The phrase, people do business with folks they know, like, and trust, which is an important part of a conversation we started a minute ago. I don't think we need to go back there, but you said, I sometimes feel like I need to start from scratch. No, people have to have a certain level of trust and confidence, right, to become a client or a referral partner. Okay. People do business with folks they know, like, and trust. What's the most important word in that sentence?
Oh, well, for me, I think it'd be trust.
Yeah. It's not. The most important word in that sentence is business. Which leads me indirectly back to the question. By the way, we spent the last 45 minutes talking about trust. It is the last word in the sentence. That's where your brain falls. And it is the most important of the three. So you got that part right. But in that sentence, the most important word is the word business. Here's
Mm.
my proof. Here's my proof on that. Are there people in your world, Sam, that you would hire? Excuse me. Are there people in your world that have been to your house, maybe for Sunday dinner or Sabbath, supper, right? That have been to your house for a game night that you've been down to the bowling alley with, or you've been to the concert with, but you wouldn't actually hire them to do what they do for, to serve yourself, your family, or your business. Are there people like that?
I I'd have to think about that because more often than not, I'm thinking I would talk to them first. Actually,
Okay, but are there some that you know well enough to know that you wouldn't?
right? Yeah, yeah.
This space is a really good example. I messaged the owner, hey, my space isn't being cleaned consistently. He said, I'll be right over to deal with it. I said, Greg, it's not your job. He goes, customer service is my job as the owner. I'm like, okay, well, I can appreciate that. He said, plus, that's not the first complaint. And I said, oh, really? This is all via text message. And he said, yep, that's what you get when you try to help out a family friend, right? So he's already making a distinction between who you know and who your
I
vendors may
see.
be, right? The flip side of that is, are there people that you have or would hire to serve yourself, your family, or your business in some capacity, whatever it is they do, that you don't picture at your house on Friday night game night or down at the bowling alley on, 2 for 1 on Wednesday, right?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. So clearly a methodology asking questions designed to find out if somebody is likable is wholly insufficient for finding out if they belong in your trusted business network. Now, I'm not saying be rigid, right? You know, let me see your books, let me see your reviews, let me see, right? You know, let me see if you do this well, right? But you start with business and add friendship rather than start with friendship and add business, right? But the people that belong in your trusted network, and it's as important for me to convince the Sam Hennigers of the world, excuse me, it's as important to me to discover the trustworthiness in the Sam Hennigers of the world as it is to convince the Sams that I'm trustworthy. I'm interested in discovering trust as much as I am in uncovering trust. And here's why. I'm shooting for mutuality. If I want you to consistently give me leads, referrals, resources, introductions that serve me, whatever that looks like, I'm going to have to do the same for you. And if I don't trust you with those resources, introductions, referrals, leads, prospects, I'm not going to give them to you. And after a while, you're going to stop giving to me because I never give to you. So it is as important to me that I discover your ability to do what you say you do well and in the world so that I know who and when to introduce people to you as it is that I convince you that I need referrals and I'm worthy of them too. And the other side of that is I need a clarity on who you serve so I can send you the right people, and you need clarity on who I serve. But if I ever only put the focus on me, number one, it's going to feel one-sided to you right from the get-go. And number two, you're going to either never give me referrals or start and then stop because there's no mutuality there, right? So people don't pause to ask the questions to discover, do you belong in my trusted network, right? Tradespeople, right, have got, handymen of the world, right? Tradespeople, blue collar workers, they've got a crummy reputation for being the sort of people that don't show up, right, and give you bid and then ghost you, right, and get the job half started and then disappear. Some of the people that are the best in that world, if I judge them based on how they look, right, or would I be comfortable having them join me to visit my mom at the assisted living facility for Sunday lunch? The answer would be heck no. But you know what? They are very good at what they do. Some of them use language that doesn't make me comfortable. As long as they don't use it in my house, I'm good with that. They ain't coming to my house for Friday night game night. I love them and I'll send them business, but they don't belong in my world, right? Right? That way. So we've got to differentiate, and people ask the wrong questions, so they don't have any awareness, and therefore they don't feel comfortable giving referrals, or their relationships die quickly because they don't understand what they're really in quest of.
Let's hammer down on that. What do those questions and conversations look like to figuring those things out?
Well, that's a 3-hour conversation.
Well,
I know. I won't do that. I'll start at the back. I don't want to say I'll start at the back. I'll start in the middle. Here, and you can use a number of questions, right? They don't have to. They don't have to be this one, but I'm going to give you a sample of questions that I would use in what I call a paired interview. A paired interview to me is any coffee, lunch, breakfast Zoom where we're trying to discover what we know about each other or maintain, right? Okay. One of my favorites is this. Sam, tell me a story about a case where the relationship started as standard. You got the deal or were about to get the deal, and then things went south all of a sudden. And you were actually able to turn it around. Don't tell me about the laydown because we all got the fun customer that was so easy and we sold them the big thing with no discounts and we made a lot of money and that was simple. And we all got the people that we couldn't satisfy because those are people that nobody can satisfy. You can tell me the stories over beer, but that's not the point of this conversation. I want the story where it started well, headed in the right direction, went south, and you turned it around, still got a 4, 4.5, or 5-star review out of it. Okay, now that's a powerful question for a number of reasons. One is that tells me how that man or woman runs their business, what they think good customer service looks like. And I'm not saying that any answer is illegitimate, but if your view of customer service is to refund the money, let them keep the product or service, and someone else is to reset expectations, I might send some people to you and some to the other person, depending on who I'm referring, right? So I'm not saying there's a wrong answer, but it tells me something about what you think good customer service looks like. The other reason that's a powerful question is that's that person's chance to be a hero. Okay. Yeah. What's the market for the story where they get to be the hero? In Sam's world, how big is the market for stories where Sam gets to be a hero? How many people are clamoring to hear that story?
Not many right now.
The spouse once, right? Oh, did you have a good day? Oh, man, I turned this thing around. Oh, really? Tell me about it. And the next time she catches you telling it to your friend, she's like, oh, my God, can I leave the room? I don't need to hear this story again, right? So all of a sudden you're likable because you just let them tell the story where they're the hero. But more importantly, it tells me something about them, okay? But here are 2 questions that nobody asks. I have this on a recording. It's 3 minutes and 15 seconds long. I charge $150 for that video. I'm going to give it to your community for free right now. So
Oh,
guys,
wow.
get your pens back out or watch the replay or something. Here comes $150 worth of, probably about $15 worth of value in less than 3 minutes. The first question that I ask when I start a parent interview or when I'm even setting it, and I say start like right in the first couple minutes, hey, what's our time check? Do you have a hard stop? Right. Blah, blah, blah. Okay. Get past that. Here's my question. Susie, Pete, Sam, Susie, I wanted to meet with you today I wanted to meet with you today to learn enough about you, your business, what you do, and most importantly, who you do it for, that I could potentially become a consistent source of referrals, introductions, prospects, and resources. Susie, I would want you to do the same for me in my business. Is that a relationship you want to pursue with me?
Wow.
Number one, if the answer is no, and it almost never is, but it might be, I'd like to know that right now. Number two, Susie is now crystal clear on why I'm meeting and why I'm going to call any future meeting. She
Mm.
knows what it's all about. Okay.
Yeah.
Susie's husband also knows what it's all about too, which is another score in the right direction, right?
That's good.
Yep.
Yes.
Am I right? Okay. Susie's partner. We'll leave it at that. Okay. So that's one question asked right at the top because it sets the tone. I'm willing to serve. I'd like to explore the opportunity for me to serve you and for you to serve me. Is that something you want to engage in? Okay.
Mm.
And the fact that you asked that question gives you credibility because ain't nobody ever asked them that. They're like, well, dang, here's somebody who knows what he's doing. That alone makes you look good in their eyes, subconsciously. Here's the other. Somewhere towards the end of the first paired interview or any time into the second, I asked this question. Susie, under what conditions would you feel comfortable referring business to me?
Mm.
Because they will then tell you what it takes and you can choose to engage with that or not, meaning maybe the bar is too high. I've never run into it. It may tell you something about their expectations that you were never going to think of on your own. Number three, they'll surprise you. The number of people go, we're good. Let's do this. Who do you need? Start looking
Yeah.
through their phone.
Sure.
Number four, you've now given yourself permission to ask for referrals when that bar has been crossed. So you
Mm.
don't have to wonder, have I earned the right to ask for them? You know that you've earned the right to ask for them. So you've given yourself permission to ask. And conversely, they've given themselves permission to give them to you.
I think that that's so important. I mean, boundaries and expectations are such a huge topic that rarely gets done right.
Rarely gets done right. And it's my experience going as meta as I can that most of the anger, angst, and upset in the world appears in the gap between what I thought was going to happen and what happened.
Mm.
Jack Welch said, tell me early and tell me everything. The way I phrase it is, I can handle anything. Tell me what you want me to handle. But when you fabricate, when you defer, when you're vague, when you're obtuse, when you're passive, when you're indirect, I'm busy solving a problem that doesn't even exist because you made me think the problem was something else. I can't work with that.
Wow, I love that, and I think we can learn so much about ourselves and about others when we talk about preferred communication style. Because being direct, especially in these kinds of relationships, these network relationships, it's letting people know what you need and what you can give. There's no harm in just flat out telling people. It might take some
They don't want to
practice,
waste
but
their
that's what
time
they
either,
need.
right? Yeah,
Mm,
they want to engage with the people that they can both help and be helped by.
mm, mm.
If that's our thought, why would we assume other people don't approach it? They just don't have the methodology, right? So you can meet a million people waiting for what's the word I'm looking for? You got a yard? You have a house?
Yeah,
Okay, you got a yard,
yeah.
right? If you went out in the spring and dumped a whole bunch of seed everywhere and then came back like 4 months later, what do you got? Not what you
Uh,
wanted, right?
right.
But you got to cultivate, weed, water, fertilize.
Mm,
So people go to networking event after network, hoping the fruit trees of the world will magically appear as themselves. The unicorn will appear, right? And they'll be like, oh, there's the guy or gal that I can do business with.
mm.
You're going to spend a lot of time dumping seed into the garden and coming back 4 months later to find out you didn't get fruit trees, you got weeds. You can be the unicorn. You can be the one that magically appears on other people's horizon by simply having a plan.
Mm. I love that. And
Is this the
especially
part where I
as,
refer to my website?
please do. Yeah, where can we connect with you, Daniel?
Yeah, sure. My website is not well done, right? It could look better. It's not ugly. It could look better. I know that. It exists, and you guys mostly is a parking place for my testimonials. Literally, that's what it's there for. But here's the challenge. You can't find me through a Google search because my full name, Daniel Patrick Andrews, is the same as a bombastic Australian parliamentarian. And if you Google my full name, the first 1 million search returns will not be me. So I went and bought the domain danielpatrickandrews.com.
Mm. Hmm.
So if you go there, your three objectives in my mind would be to find my LinkedIn profile and connect me there. Secondly, would be to find the scheduling link where you can get 15 minutes on my calendar to start a conversation. And then third would be to find the page with all the testimonials and read them.
Very good.
Right. That's the point of that web page. Right. So if you go there, but I do offer a course on how to do what I just described.
Mm. And hearing this now, having come from the mouth of a man with almost three first names, I believe it. I believe you
Uh,
know how to get yourself known and get your network working.
well, and this came to me, and I'm not going to tell you the whole origin story because I can't, because I'm looking at the clock here. I was not good at this at first. There are people in my world that have known me 20 years, 30 years, and they're like, I like you better now than I used to. I go, I get that on the micro level too. There's a guy, Dad, here in town, and we spoke, and he goes, Hey, I got something. I have to confess something to you. I said, Oh, okay, I know how this ends. He goes, Really? You think you know how it ends? I said, Dad, you're not the only one that's ever said this to me. And he said, When I first met you, but now that I know you, right, I got a lot more respect for you. And I'll say this, right? I had to learn how to build relationships. I was
Mm.
not naturally good at it. I'm naturally an entertainer. I'm naturally
Mm.
comfortable on stage. I'm naturally a smartass, but I'm not am not naturally good at building business relationships. And I had to learn it. And that's what makes me a qualified coach because I know the distance and the difference.
Mm. Daniel, in conclusion, this is something I ask every guest. This being a podcast about courage, let me ask you, what does courage mean to you?
I think in a lot of cases it means starting a journey with the trust that the end is going to be where it needs to be, right? I was talking with a coach earlier today, and she said you can't make today's decisions with the wisdom of the future because you don't have the wisdom of the future. Sometimes you have to engage a coach, and I'm not saying this because I'm a coach. She was talking about in context of her. Sometimes you have to spend the money. Sometimes you have to make the commitment, take the job, move across country with the notion that it's going to be okay. I don't think that means we need to be reckless, right? But the only thing our brain has to make decisions with is the past, and the future is not going to look like the past, particularly if we keep making, meaning some of what you do is going to fundamentally be scary.
Mm.
If people say trust your gut, sadly, that's a yes and no sort of thing, right? I wish I had the dividing line. But if you're not being scared by what you're about to do next, right?
Mm.
And don't go
Mm.
to unsafe or sketchy places. That's a different gut feeling, right? And if it's
Sure.
nervousness or fear, right? But you've got to trust that the rest of the world already sees the outcome, right? If you have a coach that can show that he or she gets this sort of results, then you're going to have to trust that it's going to be true for you too, even if that's not your experience up to now.
I love that. Daniel Andrews, thank you for coming on the show.
Sam, thanks for having me.
I'm Sam, the Courage Coach for Executives, and remember, it starts with you.